Today, we're jumping into one of the most intense and honestly tragic stories from the Middle Ages. It's all about the conflict between King Henry II of England and his best friend, Thomas Becket. This is a story of power, loyalty, and a friendship that literally broke a kingdom.
So think about it for a second. Can your absolute best friend become your worst enemy? What happens when two super powerful people, guys who were once like brothers, suddenly find themselves on opposite sides of a fight they both refuse to lose?
And believe me, this was way more than just a personal argument. Their spectacular fallout led to a shocking murder that sent shockwaves across all of Europe and completely changed the relationship between church and state forever.
Okay, so to understand how it all went so wrong, we first have to go back to when things were going incredibly right. Let's look at how this powerful friendship was built in the first place.
So who are our main characters? Well, on one side you've got Henry II. He becomes king in 1154 and really needs smart, trustworthy people to help him run the country. And on the other side there's Thomas Becket. Now, he wasn't born into a noble family, but he was brilliant, super charming, and had already worked his way up in the church. Henry saw this talent and made Becket his Lord Chancellor, which is basically his #1 advisor, the most powerful person in England other than the king himself.
And these two weren't just colleagues, they were best friends. Seriously, they went hunting together, they traveled together, they made huge decisions together. People back then even said it was like they shared one single mind. Becket lived this life of total luxury, wearing expensive silks, throwing parties, all while being the king's closest ally. Their bond seemed completely unbreakable.
But then, the king made a big move. It was a decision he thought would lock down his power for good. Instead, it would end up destroying his most important friendship and, really, set the stage for total disaster.
So in 1162, Henry makes Becket the new Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the entire church in England. Henry's thinking was pretty simple. Hey, my best friend is now in charge of the church, so he'll always have my back. Oh, he was so wrong. Becket went through this complete personal transformation. He gave up the fancy clothes, the parties, everything. His loyalty suddenly switched from the king to God and the church. And just like that, the king's best friend became his biggest problem.
The big fight between them really boiled down to this one issue, this term, clerk convicts. Now, what does that mean? Well, these were people in the clergy, like priests, who had committed serious crimes. And I mean serious crimes like theft or even murder. The huge question was, who gets to punish them?
And here's the core of the conflict. King Henry believed there should be one law for everybody. If a priest commits a murder, he should be tried in the king's royal court and face a harsh punishment just like any other criminal. Makes sense, right? But Becket completely disagreed. He argued that the church was independent. Clergy could only be tried in special church courts, which often gave much lighter punishments, like penance. For Becket, defending the church's freedom was way more important than his friendship with the king.
Now, this was not a problem they could just sit down and talk through. The argument escalated fast, moving from a simple disagreement to straight-up open defiance, and it pushed both of them to the absolute limit.
In 1164, Henry put his foot down. He created this document called the Constitutions of Clarendon. It was basically a list of rules designed to give him, the king, way more control over the church. For instance, one rule said church officials couldn't appeal to the Pope in Rome without his permission. Under a ton of pressure, Becket actually agreed to it at first. But then, he changed his mind, refused, and called it a total betrayal of the church. And you can bet King Henry was absolutely furious.
The king was now out to crush his former friend. He even put Becket on trial for old financial charges from when he was Chancellor. Becket realized his life was actually in danger, so he disguised himself, fled England in the dead of night, and escaped to France, where he lived in exile for 6 long years. The conflict hit its peak in 1170. While Becket was still in France, Henry did something that was the ultimate insult. He decided to have his son crowned as the next king. Now, this ceremony was a rite that belonged only to the Archbishop of Canterbury, to Becket, but Henry just had another archbishop do it instead. Eventually, a very fragile peace deal was worked out, and Becket was finally allowed to return to England. But Becket wasn't coming back quietly. Before he even got back on English soil, he made a huge power move. He used his authority to excommunicate the bishops who had taken part in that illegal coronation. Now, to excommunicate someone means to officially kick them out of the church.
This was a very big deal back then, a serious spiritual punishment. Becket was sending a clear message. He was not backing down.
This defiant act would be Becket's last. The angry bishops he just excommunicated went straight to King Henry in France to complain, and what happened next would seal the Archbishop's fate for good.
When King Henry heard what Becket had done, he just exploded in this legendary fit of rage. In front of his whole court, he supposedly screamed something like, "Will no one rid me of this low-born priest?" He was frustrated, he was angry, he felt betrayed, and whether he meant it as a direct order or not, some of his men took his words very, very literally.
4 knights heard the king's outburst and took it as a command. They immediately rode off for England. On December 29, 1170, they found Becket and confronted him, but he refused to give in. They followed him right into the great Canterbury Cathedral itself, and there, on the holy ground of the church, they attacked and murdered him with their swords. Murdering an archbishop inside his own cathedral. This was an act of shocking violence that horrified the entire Christian world. The consequences for everyone involved were immediate, and they were huge. The news created a massive international scandal. Public outrage against King Henry was off the charts. His reputation was completely destroyed. And the biggest irony? The murder ended up making the church, the very institution Henry was trying to control, stronger than ever. Becket was instantly seen as a hero who had died for his faith. King Henry was horrified, and he swore he never meant for Becket to be killed. To show how sorry he was, he walked barefoot through Canterbury and even allowed monks to whip him as a public apology. It didn't take long for the church to act. Just 3 years after his death, the Pope officially made Becket a saint. His tomb in Canterbury became one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in the world, attracting visitors for hundreds of years. So in the end, Thomas Becket got in death what he fought so hard for in life. He became this powerful symbol, a martyr who was willing to die to protect the church from the power of a king. Their tragic story is still this legendary tale of friendship, faith, and the ultimate price of your convictions. Which leaves us with a final question to think about. Who do you think was right? Was it King Henry for wanting one single law for all his citizens? Or was it Becket for defending his institution's independence? And maybe even more important, where do we see these same kinds of clashes between government power and religious freedom playing out in our world today?